frankly, there was not a great deal of new information made available. I believe this is true, first, because it's still only approximately 30 hours since the tragic events. Second, the focus at the scene of the tragedy is on life-saving and beginning the grim process of removing the victims. And finally, because of the desire not to repeat Oklahoma City, where there were statements made that were beyond what the facts would sustain and had to subsequently be withdrawn. I believe it is very prudent that these agencies are acting with such deliberate nature as they go about this investigation and release information. It's my sense that this will be a long investigation, that there will be almost daily chapters of additional information, but there will not be a major download at any one point. The question that the Senate Intelligence Committee is now dealing with is, where do we go from here? We have already recommended our budget to the Senate. That budget focuses on 4 priorities: increasing our ability to eavesdrop through strengthening the National Security Agency, increasing our human intelligence so that we'll have greater capability of getting inside terrorist cells, increasing our ability to analyze the information that is made available, and a more aggressive research and development program so that our intelligence agencies continue in their tradition of leading the world in new knowledge. We also began today reviewing legislation that has been developed over the past several months with the involvement of several Senate committees: the Judiciary Committee, the Armed Services Committee, the Government Operations Committee, as well as the Select Committee on Intelligence. This legislation is largely focused at reorganizing the intelligence communities in order to give a greater central focus of decision-making, of resource allocation, and a single point of accountability. Today we had 4 agencies who are all testifying about their particular part in this tragedy. There was not a single agency, much less a single individual, who could be looked to for ultimate accountability as to what has happened, analysis, and a plan of action for the future. We believe that is a serious restraint on the capacity of our intelligence community to deal with the kind of challenges that they will have in the future, particularly in terms of terrorism. And I would hope that this Congress, this 107th Congress, as early as possible, hopefully in this calendar year, would begin the process of dealing with a restructuring of our intelligence communities in order to overcome that deficiency. Be glad to answer any questions.
Some members of Congress have...
One single directorate over all of intelligence gathering?
Yes, I believe there should be some place in the federal government, and we are tentatively suggesting that it should be in the White House, where there is a person who has the responsibility for the overall coordination of our intelligence activities.
Some have, members of Congress have said this was a catastrophic failure of intelligence.
I would repeat what I said yesterday. I think that is premature. Until we have more information as to precisely what happened, you cannot reasonably then line that up with what you would have expected the intelligence agencies to do. I asked that question in today's briefing. Is the intelligence community evaluating itself so that we'll be able to get some assessment of where there were gaps in our intelligence gathering? I think that will be a continuing question, but we don't have the answer to that question today.
What do you know about the Florida flight schools that might have trained some of these?
Well, there has been some as yet not fully substantiated rumors that some of the participants were trained at flight schools in Florida.
And you know whether that's true or?
I do not know whether that's true or not, and that was raised in the nature of speculation, and the agencies said they are tracking that to ground to see if there's some validation of it.
Mr. Chairman, could you help us out? We were told that some of the hijackers may have had passports from two Middle Eastern countries. Could you tell us what those countries were?
The answer that there was no reference to that in the briefing today.
Have you heard anything along those lines?
No.
Telecommunications companies.
I'm sorry, could you speak a little?
Sure. The FBI has asked telecommunications companies to implement new technology to make it easier to wiretap and to get information about using surveillance. Do you think the events of yesterday step up the pressure for the private sector and specifically for telecom companies to implement these kind of new equipment?
The answer is whether yesterday's events do this or not. A whole set of other things that have occurred around the world indicate the fact that we cannot rely on the form of eavesdropping, signals intelligence that we have in the past. In the past, if you wanted to know what was passing between the Supreme Court and the Capitol, you would put up an electronic sponge between the two and collect the information off the airways. Today, the Supreme Court and the Capitol are probably communicating with each other through computers. And in order to get the same level of information, you've got to have access to those computers, both the information that's being stored in them and the information that's being transmitted between them. It's a much more difficult technical task, and it's one of the reasons that we're putting such an emphasis on our priority of reestablishing our previous level of capacity to eavesdrop.
Do you need more cooperation from the private sector in trying to figure out some of these technological
Could you
problems?
talk to us the camera, sir?
We have had substantial cooperation from the private sector, particularly the telephone companies and computer and equipment manufacturers, computer and otherwise. I'm not aware that there is a big gap that needs to be filled, but new technology is a major challenge to the intelligence community.
If there was one person or office in the White House coordinating, how would that work, given that the FBI, CIA, the agencies you mentioned still are doing the intelligence gathering? How could that one person or office then be held accountable for what these various agencies are doing?
Well, that office would be involved in the tasking of the intelligence agencies since one of the principal consumers of intelligence information is the president and those responsible to the president. The White House is in the most advantageous position to say what it is we want the intelligence community to prioritize. What is the information that we need in order to make better decisions at the highest levels of our government. Second, it would be involved in establishing a budgetary priority for the intelligence agencies, which would drive the budget recommendations of the president and of the Congress. Third, this office would be involved in oversight of the outcomes of the intelligence agency and be accountable that the goals that have been set were being accomplished.
Senator, do you think that greater security against terrorism will require some additional inconvenience in travel or somewhat less civil liberties protection?
We are certainly about to see some greater inconvenience in travel. If you have in the past had a practice of getting to the airport an hour before flight time, I would recommend that you add another 15 or 30 minutes to that beginning later this week when commercial aviation is restored. There will be additional practices. Things like checking your bags at curbside are likely to be somewhere between eliminated and significantly more severely restricted.
What about civil liberties generally?
I don't believe that there is any reason that we need to restrict our civil liberties. That would be the ultimate victory of the terrorist if he were to cause this great, free, and open society to become more like they are.
Senator Graham, some members of the House have said that in their briefing today, they were told that this may not be over. Did you get a similar line during the Senate briefing?
I would say that's the right way to describe it. No one is prepared to give an insurance policy that yesterday was a one-day event. Now, that's not to say that there is going to be more, but that we need to be in a yellow light period. We can neither say red, that we're still in jeopardy, or green, that the path is clear. It's yellow, that caution.
Senator, as far as research and development, what sort of new technologies do you think we ought to be investing?
Well, as an example, we need to be investing more in things like gathering information through infrared devices that allow us to know what other countries are doing with their missile testing program. We need to be investing in how do we protect our satellites from either a land or space-based attack. Historically, the American intelligence agencies have been the gold standard of the world for technologies, particularly communications technologies. In the last few years, we've lost that edge. We need to reacquire it.
Senator, some of your colleagues are calling for an ultimatum against Afghanistan to produce Osama bin Laden. How do you feel like that, and has that been discussed?
Well, again, I think it's premature to be targeting who the perpetrators, and if there were any countries that had been providing support to those perpetrators.
Do you think you're going to be able to get an agreement on this legislation like today or tomorrow? I mean,
No,
they're
I
talking
don't.
about bringing up the CJS bill or the defense bill this week.
Yeah.
So-
The Commerce State Justice is scheduled to come back on the floor tomorrow, and if it's finished this week, then next week we'll be taking up the defense authorization bill. No, I do not anticipate, and I don't think that something as significant as a reorganization of our intelligence agencies ought to be done on a rushed basis. This legislation is the result of several months of work among the relevant committees. We need to now, at an early date, present it to the full Senate and have it fully considered. Yes.
Some reports saying that terrorist groups had warned the U.S. a month ago about attacking. Why was airport security not increased then, and why has it taken so long?
The answer to the first question is there has been a general sense that there was a heightened level of concern about a terrorist attack, but it was not at a specific operational level. There was no evidence as to what form that attack might take, where it might take place, or when it might take place.
Senator, when you talk about how the electronic sponge is no longer working to collect intelligence, does that diminish the role of the NSA in the future?
No, if anything, the role of the NSA will continue to be a paramount part of our intelligence gathering. A substantial percentage of all of the data that goes into the final intelligence reports that goes to people like the President or the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State is that which has been gathered by the NSA. The problem is the technologies that the NSA has largely been equipped to utilize. While it's not obsolete, it is a diminishing percentage of the information that we would like to gather by eavesdropping. So what we've got to do is to maintain our capability in the sponge between the Supreme Court and the Capitol building while we're adding capabilities to deal with the challenges of the new technology. Yes.
Various members of Congress have been talking about different ideas for combating terrorism. Has the administration asked for anything in particular, quickly as part of, say, the appropriations request to help them in this particular situation?
Not to my knowledge. Any other questions?
Anything about the identities or the ethnicities, the countries of where some of the terrorists might have come from?
There is some evidence upon which speculation is occurring, but I can't talk about either the evidence or the speculation.
Do you have any evidence that there were intercepts that were just not analyzed or missed somehow that could have helped out here?
No, I have no evidence on that, on unused or inappropriately used intercepts. Yeah.
What about the reports of congratulatory calls between bin Laden associates that were intercepted? Have you heard anything about that? And who those associates might have been?
Yeah. I have heard that speculation, can't comment on it.
Is there any indication that intelligence gathering policies limiting things like wiretapping might have come into play to prevent intelligence agencies from detecting these attacks?
There's been, I have heard no statements that there were legal restraints on our use of wiretaps or other conventional means of getting access to information that may have contributed to a gap in our information on this. Okay, Mr. Lippman has the last question.
Several critics of the intelligence community have said that in the wake of Congress's act to prohibit assassination, the emphasis on human intelligence gathering has diminished. Would you agree with that, and do you think that that policy needs to be revisited?
First, I think the reason that human intelligence has diminished is first because during the Cold War we had a great difficulty effectively using human intelligence against the Soviet Union. Second, we developed technical means such as spy satellites to listen and take pictures that were very effective against the kind of Soviet targets of information that we were seeking. Third, the United States has had a history of being uncomfortable with spies. It's almost like spies are not what real democracies do. And we have relied substantially on other countries to provide us that kind of information. As it relates to the specific issue of assassination, I met last night with Ambassador Bremer, who is the author of one of the major studies on our intelligence community, and I asked him if he thought we should change the policy on assassination, and he said his commission, which was a very aggressive commission in terms of pushing the intelligence community, had looked at that issue and had concluded that they did not believe that the current policy was a deterrent on our ability to either gather information or to protect U.S. interests, and therefore specifically did not recommend a change in our policy, which is that the United States government does not engage in assassinations.
Do you agree with that?
I was and am influenced by a thoughtful commission led by such a thoughtful commentator on intelligence as Ambassador Bremer.
So you don't want to revisit this idea?
I'm prepared to revisit it, but I think if his group came to that judgment, that would likely be the conclusion that a revisitation by a congressional group would reach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator, what
Javier
budget
Benton
and
over here
scheduling
has
focus
background on the intelligence authorization bill.
Well, I hope that the two are not mutually exclusive.
On Wednesday at around 5 p.m. Eastern, Health and Human Services Secretary Tommy Thompson and a number of public health officials talked to reporters about the response to terrorist attacks in New York City and Washington, D.C. Their comments are about a half hour.
Ladies and gentlemen, first let me introduce the people that are with me. Art Lawrence here is the Acting Assistant Secretary for Health and is Admiral in the Medical Corps. And next to, we have Jim Hughes over here, who is from CDC, and Mac Lumpkin from FDA is over here, who's a doctor, and Bob Knaus, who cannot be with us but is heading up our Office of Emergency